President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 proclaimed that all persons held as slaves are and henceforward shall be free. But after the assassination of Lincoln in April 1865, most Southern state legislatures enacted restrictive laws known as Black Codes, which denied former enslaved people suffrage and other rights. That same year, Frederick Douglass famously said, "Slavery is not abolished until the black man has the ballot." Many Republicans in Congress agreed and passed the 15th Amendment in 1870, which stated that voting rights could not be denied by race, color, or previous condition of servitude. In the decade of Reconstruction that followed, Black Americans elected 22 black men to Congress and helped to elect Republican Ulysses S. Grant in 1868. But the emancipation of enslaved people and the end of the Civil War spawned the creation of the Ku Klux Klan. The KKK used lynching and intimidation to prevent formerly enslaved African Americans from voting. And to make things worse, after Reconstruction ended in 1877, Southern states passed Jim Crow laws to ensure segregation of African Americans by race. As a result, black voting rights were suppressed through poll taxes, literacy tests, and the grandfather clause that still allowed illiterate white men to vote if their grandfathers had voted by 1867. So as Jim Crow was restricting the rights of black Americans in the South, women of all races were fighting for their right to vote. The fight for women's suffrage was rooted in the anti-slavery movement, with leaders such as Sojourner Truth, a preacher from Ulster County, New York. She had been freed in 1827 and became an outspoken proponent for women's rights and suffrage. But early white suffragist leaders who were outraged that the 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote before white women broke off their association with abolitionists. Check this out. In 1918, in a letter lobbying for the 19th Amendment that would give women the right to vote, white suffragist Carrie Chapman Catt wrote to Southern congressmen stating, "The present condition of the South makes sovereigns of some Negro men, while all white women are their subjects. These are sad but solemn truths. If you want white supremacy, why not have it constitutionally, honorably? The Federal Amendment offers the way." So then, after the 19th Amendment was ratified in August 1920, black women were still not granted full voting rights, as the amendment didn't address the state laws and intimidation meant to deter black Americans from voting. Fast forward, during the 1932 presidential election between incumbent Republican President Herbert Hoover and Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt, African American sentiment toward the Republican Party began to change. You see, Hoover's administration failed to apply economic relief for black Americans hit hard by the Great Depression. He also tried to attract support from the Southern segregationists, who were responsible for upholding oppressive policies against African Americans. According to Vincent Hutchings, a diversity professor at the University of Michigan, data showed that about 2/3 of African Americans were identified with the Democratic Party by 1960. A succession of events during the black struggle for civil rights in the following decade would strengthen African American support for the Democratic Party. First, during the Freedom Summer Campaign in 1964, in which college students traveled to Mississippi to help black citizens register to vote, organizers Michael Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman were kidnapped and killed on June 21st. 2 weeks after that, on July 2nd, President Lyndon B. Johnson, a Democrat, signed the Civil Rights Act into law, banning segregation in America. This led Republican nominee Senator Barry Goldwater to staunchly oppose the Civil Rights Act during the 1964 presidential race against Johnson, further alienating black voters from the Republican Party. Johnson went on to win the election. Finally, in 1965, Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law that banned literacy tests and other methods used to suppress the black vote. The percentage of eligible black voters in America went from 23% before the Voting Rights Act to 61% by 1969. From 1992 to 2006, the number of black Americans in Congress were in the high 30s and low 40s. In 2012, 66.6% of eligible black voters turned out at the polls to re-elect the United States' first African-American president, Barack Obama. This was the first time that black voters outnumbered white voters for a presidential election. But African American voters still face voter suppression through political exercises such as gerrymandering, a way that state legislatures are redrawing maps to diminish the black vote. Other practices that continue to suppress the African American vote include purges of voter rolls in black communities, arduous voter ID laws, changes to voter registration requirements, limitations of polling locations in black communities, and reduced early voting options. But despite all this, it is pivotal that black Americans hit the polls, because the best way to end oppression is to vote.